Welcome to Heavy Metal Rex. My name is Oasis, and I want to introduce you to a new subsection of my channel called Tuner Talk. What I hope to achieve with this channel is invite tuners from all over, and then hopefully they can answer some questions that either I have or the community has. I think with the 2022 WRX, we've noticed a lot of new Subaru owners, and you mix those with old Subaru owners who are stigmatized from owning older Subarus, and we get a lot of anecdotal answers. And no offense to anybody who has owned a Subaru a long time, you know, we understand, right? New people ask questions, they sometimes don't get all of the right information, or sometimes they get wrong information. It can happen. And we don't want to play the game of telephone when it comes to cars. And so I'm hoping that we can get tuners out here to the channel, we can ask them these questions, and you guys can get the right information. So for the first episode, I actually invited Graham from Boosted Performance, and the reason I invited him is he actually tuned my 2022 WRX, and I actually had some people asking me questions. If you've seen my other video about the different Pro Tunes that are out there, the numbers are varying, right? That in itself was a question. But instead of me trying to answer for a tuner and other tuners, why don't we just ask them? So let's go ahead and ask Graham some questions. All right, guys, I have Graham from Boosted Performance here, and I'm just going to let him say a couple of words. Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
So you want to tell us a little bit about your shop?
Sure. So tuning is what we do. It's pretty much all we do. Boosted Performance was started around 2011. I picked up a new 2011 STI kind of late in the year. I think maybe it was even early 2012. And I had a couple Subarus before that, and used to, got familiar with doing tuning on them, knew how to put the maps on them, knew how to data log, kind of understood the consumer side of things. But um, never really tuned those cars. With the 2011, it was brand new. There weren't a lot of guys working with it. So decided at that point, you know what, let's take the dive. Let's figure this out. I had a background in software engineering, so I was working and doing web development, web applications, things like that. So it was just kind of a matter of learning the engine side of things and how ECU control works and all that jazz. So with the 2011, I took it through all the paces and did all the things to it, bigger turbo eventually, E85, all that fun stuff. Had local guys here at the Iowa Subaru Club that noticed and were like, "Hey, tune my Subaru. I don't want to have to drive to Chicago or go to Kansas City or some of those places were not good experiences." And so, I started working nights and weekends out of my garage. Come on over, we'll hook up the laptop. We'll go out to didn't have a dyno at the time. That was all-wheel drive. So I said, we'll drive out and put an AFR sniffer in the tailpipe and do polls out on between the cornfields. Was kind of how it all began. And then around, let's see, it was 2016, I decided, I got so busy with it, I just couldn't keep up. And I decided, this is the point where I either have to make this a business or need to step away from it and, figure out what I want to do. And certainly didn't really enjoy doing software development. It's a good paying career and my engineering brain enjoyed it in a way, but being able to tune Subarus and tune anything, that's obviously a dream job for a lot of people. And for me, I don't know, it didn't feel like a dream job. It just felt like something I was good at, something I could do, something I would enjoy, So went for it in 2016 and have been doing it full time since then. Moved to Chicago for a few years, 2017 to 2020. My wife and I were living out there working with Six Star Motorsports as they were kind of growing and needed a good tuner. We kind of went and met that need. Um, Brought my wife on full time, right? Basically, about 6 months after we moved to Chicago in 2017, we got busier and busier and busier, and I couldn't keep up on my own. She has a degree in nursing, and that was her career. And I said, look, I need your help at least. And help turned into we do this full time together, and we're still up to our eyeballs at this point. So moved back here to Iowa. We partnered with a good friend of ours. His name's Jeremy. He started FT86 Speed Factory and then started Subi Speed, companies I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yep.
No longer owns those companies, who sold those companies. And we partnered on a company called Paragon Performance. And Paragon Performance is doing stuff with the C8 Corvette, primarily developing parts for it. But also, we're interested in doing tuning, performance, anything along those lines. So we opened up that shop about, it's been a little over 2 years ago now. And we have a dyno cell there. That's where we can do all of our testing and our tuning and everything. So like the 22 WRX that I brought over from SubiSpeed, I still have a partnership with them, is all done there at Paragon in the dyno cell. Um, and yeah, so still operate boosted, my wife and I, and then also operate Paragon Performance. So that's kind of me and what I do.
That's actually really interesting, and this isn't even one of the questions, but I'm glad that you brought this up. Your background in software development, because I've been in IT for over 20 years, and I work on the software side, and I
Sure.
always wondered that if there was some overlap between, especially newer cars and tuning ECUs and understanding that software and cracking software when new cars come out, and having some sort of software engineering background. So you're basically telling me that there is some overlap.
Kind of. Here's my 2 cents on it. Um, what languages do you work with?
I don't do it myself. I'm actually more like project management side.
Okay, got it. Okay,
But
so
I
the
work
so
with
the
a
so
lot of software engineers.
okay, so the programming languages they use, that's like Java, .NET, things like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Those programming languages are laid out in a human readable form. You write them with regular words and expressions and things that make sense, and then that translates into the magic code behind the scenes that does things, right?
Right.
With an ECU, it's written in hex and it's procedural language. It's stuff that you can't just open it up and be like, oh, there's where they laid out the ignition timing, and
Right.
there's where they wrote in readable terms that it maps over to this variable and does that. It doesn't work like that. Cobb and other companies that reverse engineer the ECUs, they go and translate that and expose it as readable tables. So
Hmm.
you can see, RPM and load and then your values that go into that. What I will say that where the software engineering mindset helps is being able to conceptualize things. If you're tuning a car, being able to kind of manage everything that's going on at the same time in the back of your head and make your adjustments and kind of take everything into account. When you write software, it's kind of a similar mindset where you have to be able to consider, like, okay, if I make this adjustment, how is it going to impact these 5 other systems
Hmm.
at the same time? It's that mindset. It's the engineering mindset, I guess. I think that's where most of the other tuners that I know and I talk to, and um, you know I feel like are on a similar level in this industry. A lot of them have software engineering or engineering backgrounds
Hmm.
versus the guys who were more hands-on mechanics and just said, ah, I'm going to figure out how to tune.
Right.
I don't feel like that's as easy for them to get into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because now that you said that, I wouldn't let any of my software engineers do any of this because I'm telling you, they don't look at 5 steps ahead. This is why we
Yeah,
have just terrible deployments from time to time. Anyway, so I
true.
thank you for explaining that because I
Sure.
was always was wondering that because it would be cool to one day learn, but I'm like, well, now I got to learn cars and I also have to learn software development. Like, anyway, so let's.
It's yeah, it's a lot. And the other thing too is, you know, there's starting to be some good places to get education on it out there. HP Academy is a good one to kind of learn. But back when I was doing it, there wasn't anything like that. You had to scour forums and read 10 different opinions and try to figure out which one was right. Like trying to learn how ECU tuning works is not easy because it's
Mhm.
not like a college course you can take.
Right.
So it's challenging.
Regardless of how many of those ads you see on Facebook that you could learn how to tune in 2 weeks, it's probably not
No,
true.
no. It took me over a year of just tinkering with it very slowly to like feel confident. It's not something that's just like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, this is super obvious and easy. It's not like
Right.
that at all.
I've always because I we have a couple of shops here locally that are friends. They want to actually get some dynos and they want to start tuning. One of the questions they asked me was like, "Hey, you have a computer background. Do you think you could spend some time to learn?" And I was like, I maybe, but like, there's so much about cars I don't know that I feel like
Yeah.
me just messing with the computer side may not be the best idea."
So that's a good point is understanding the ECU and what it's doing and like this table turns the boost up. Okay, that's one thing. But then you have to understand like what is turning the boost up doing? How
Exactly.
does that impact the engine? What is, what's exhaust back pressure have to do with things? What are pressure ratios for a turbine? It you have to understand the mechanical side of it too. And that was the thing that I think maybe was unique for me was that I have always been a gearhead. I've always wanted to understand how engines work. So I already had a good understanding of that. And then I combined that with the software side to, I guess be very good all the way around, if that makes sense.
It does
You,
that.
you have to understand
Yep.
both sides. I see a lot of tuners that don't understand how engines work or anything, and that's
That's
disastrous.
really scary to know that they're out there
Yeah.
tuning people's cars.
Oh, and then you've got the guys that are really good with engines. They can build an engine, they understand setting up an engine, picking the right parts, but they don't have the software engineering mindset, and they're
Mhm.
trying to just tune cars too. That can be disastrous. They don't understand what all the software is doing.
So
So,
if you, I guess this is maybe not a fair question, but let's say you only had one side or the other. Which side do you think would be easier to start with to then learn the other side?
so definitely the engineering mindset, the software engineering side. If you can understand the tuning, if you can look through all the tables and really understand how they all connect to each other, how they all impact each other, I think it's easier to go and teach yourself and learn the um, internal combustion engine side of things
Yeah,
versus it is to understand that really well and then go try to understand how an ECU works. And again,
right.
I'd say that's easier to go that direction.
Interesting. I didn't even think that this was going to be the conversation that we were going to have, but I'm actually glad that we're having it because these are actually questions that have come up to me in my personal time, and even like from my friends who have shops that want to eventually add dynos. And
Yep.
my answer to them was the same. I'm like, well, I don't know. Just because I know computers doesn't mean all of a sudden I know cars. Like, there would be a lot of training that would
Yep.
need to happen before I could just show up and be like, hey, let me just plug my laptop up to this and do stuff. Because you mentioned hex and decoding. Another side tangent is I had spent a lot of time playing PC games, and I spent a
Okay.
lot of time converting save files from hex into something where I can read and get free items. So not saying
Yeah.
it's the same thing, but I've played
It,
that
it
game a little
is it
bit.
is kind of the same thing actually. Like you literally go in there and you have to look like you kind of know what you're looking for. This boost value exists somewhere and you
Hmm.
go find it in the hex
Yep.
and
Which
map
in
it.
our case was just decoding almost everything
Yep.
until I knew what it is I was looking at now. Anyway, so that's
That's that's
completely
that's that's reverse engineering for ECUs too. It's the same idea.
interesting. So
Just
basically, you're saying
yep.
I'm ready to go. Now I just need to learn how to do engines.
You know what? I'll tell you what. The people who can do reverse engineering on like translating the hex and getting into ECUs, that if you think tuning is kind of a rare skill like I
Hmm.
do, that is an extremely rare skill.
Yeah.
Companies like Cobb and the others out there, they'll pay top dollar to those guys who
Oh
can
yeah.
do that type of reverse engineering. Or if you're confident enough to do it, start your own business and create tuning software, that's a gold mine right there. I've looked at it, I've spent some time on it, I can do
Hmm.
some of it. The problem for me is I mentally I just can't mentally sit there and stare at it and do
Yes.
it. It's too
Hmm.
much time of that versus when I tune, I get to go to the dyno, be hands
Yep.
on, hear the car rip. That just works better for me. I could never be a reverse engineer, but man, if you can, that's
I
a
don't.
good skill.
I can't even look at an Excel sheet without falling asleep. So there's no
Well, maybe
way.
not then. Might need a lot of coffee or something.
There's no way I could do it. Anyway, so
Yeah.
let's get into the actual prepared questions. These are questions that people have asked me in the YouTube comments, or people have asked on Facebook, or I've seen other people ask, or even questions that I've had myself. And it's it's kind of related to Subaru, but also a little bit more generalized. So the first question I had was more, you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about how long you've had the shop. The how long have you been tuning Subarus?
So basically, been tuning Subarus since 2011 was when
Right.
I was
Yeah.
when I kind of started. That was when I officially, I think it was actually somewhere technically 2012, maybe like March or April of 2012, when I tuned my first customer car, if you will.
Right. I
Somebody
see. Yeah.
paid me to tune their car. It was about 2012.
Okay.
So
And
I've
yeah,
been doing it since then, and then full time since 2016.
yeah.
And
And
then,
you went through your whole background and you pretty much answered that question
yep.
fairly well.
And
So
then
we'll. Sorry. Go
to
ahead.
date, people usually ask, well, how many Subarus have you tuned? I actually, being an IT nerd, believe it or not, I have every single tune I've ever written and every single data log I've ever taken. It's
Yeah.
all archived, it's all in the
Backups.
cloud, it's backed up, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have a count of how many cars I've tuned, and to date, it's 4,256.
Wow. That is a
That's just
lot.
That's just the Subarus too, not even counting other types of cars that are in different folders and whatever. So yeah, it's again, it's all I do. I don't
Right.
build engines for people. I don't install parts for people. I've got other shops, other people I recommend for that. I just sit here and tune. That's it.
That's amazing. So a little bit of experience tuning Subarus, just a little, right?
Yeah, yeah, quite a bit. And then, specifically, you're probably going to ask, we'll kind of segue into it, the FA20s. When the FA20 came out in 15, that's basically right when I was full time with tuning, and I was working with Subi Speed at the time, and they had a car, and initially Ecutech was the only software we could use. So I remember that car had just 500 miles on it, and I was out there flashing it and playing with it and ripping it on the street and testing it. So from the beginning, the FA20s were something that I worked with right away.
Yeah. That's good because I mean that's a lot of the comparisons that people have been making, obviously, because there's nothing else to compare it to right now, you know.
Yep.
So this is a question that keeps coming up over and over, and I know you're going to give one definitive answer: is intakes without a tune, good or bad?
It depends. Okay. So I'll try not to go into too much detail, but I'll
Oh,
try to
please,
be,
you actually, because
well, okay.
you definitely go
Okay.
into detail.
Okay. I like to try to, be detailed for the guys that like details. I like to
Mm-hmm.
also just try to like explain like I'm five for guys who just want the quick answer, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
try to do both. So,
Okay.
um, these cars are still math based primarily for their fueling, meaning that they have the mass airflow sensor that measures the air coming through the intake into the engine. Um, the housing diameter is directly impacts the way the sensor reads. A larger diameter, the air's moving slower, and without actually being able to tune it and scale for that difference, the engine or the ECU is going to calculate less airflow, which means that in situations at high load where the fuel control is open loop, which means it's not using the front O2 sensor to trim um, the AFRs, it will go lean. So if the target is at a certain value and the MAF is suddenly reading much lower because the intake diameter is larger because you change the intake, it will run the car leaner. And obviously we know that to a point, lean fueling and boost is dangerous. It's going to create knock. It's going to, hurt things. So if you are changing to an intake that perhaps just flows more efficiently, doesn't have as many bends, doesn't have rubber in it, things that help smooth the airflow, straighten the airflow, but still reads the same because the diameter is similar. For example, I haven't um, gotten to test it yet, but visually it looks like the new AEM intake
Yeah.
is probably a lot closer to a stock size intake. And I don't know if you noticed on the FA20s, Cobb changed their intake. They call it that Cobb Redline intake
Yeah.
now. So somebody installed one of those, and I hadn't tuned it yet, and I figured, okay, historically, like with the EJs, Cobb came out with the red line. They didn't actually change the MAF housing at all. It was still a much larger diameter MAF housing. So
Uh-huh.
on the FA20, the first one I did, I started with a MAF scaling that was assumed it was going to be just like the prior Cobb SF, except with carbon fiber bits or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That was totally wrong. And so I had the person measure the diameter, and sure enough, Cobb had sized it down much closer to stock. They made that intake so it can work in stock form versus
Interesting.
that the typical SF intakes are much larger, so they can read more airflow, which means they can handle more horsepower down the road, but they don't work without tuning.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk. So the ETS intake, for example,
That's exactly
if you,
where we're
the
going. Yeah.
original the original ETS intake that you put in there, it didn't initially have the sleeve, as I understand it, that they added later. And people were discovering through data logging and being on the dyno that they were getting kind of lean fueling when the car would transition to open loop fueling, which it does in stock form. If they were using like the JB4 to manipulate things, they could kind of level it out and get it closer. But in some situations, it wasn't very ideal. I had one of my first FA24 tuning guys. He did all the things initially, and he was sending me logs with the intake on there, and I was like, "Oh, that's not good." It was knocking, it was pissed off, the dam was moving. So they came out with the sleeve. The sleeve goes inside the tube and restricts the airflow down to a diameter that's closer to stock, which speeds it back up and makes it read a lot closer to stock. So it kind of helps correct those AFRs. Um, the Burger Motorsports intake, like you have on your car, it's it's somewhere in between. It's not quite as large as ETS without the sleeve, but it's certainly larger than stock to the point where, again, I wouldn't suggest running it without a tune. In general, don't do anything on these cars without a proper tune. If you don't want to tune it, just leave it alone. You don't enjoy it. If you want to tune it, then you're fine.
I'm glad that you finally said it because this is what people need to know. And coming from
Yeah.
somebody who's tuned over 4,000 Subarus, if you still are not listening to this right here, then I don't know what to tell you. Okay,
You
just
know,
don't listen to Facebook.
yeah, it's tricky. There's a lot of opinions out there, and there's some points where, again, certain intakes that come down the pipe, they might still run a decent safe AFR, they might not. But the best thing to do, like I said, just because of the sensitive nature of these cars and the fact that they are still MAF-based cars, is to leave it alone, leave the intake alone, put a cap back on it, you know, put the bypass valve on it if you think you want to hear some more whoosh noises. Focus on the cosmetics of your car, but ultimately leave it pretty close to stock form so that the stock tune works the way it's meant to.
Mm, fantastic. I'm glad that we got that out of the way because that's
Yep.
just tired of seeing that question pop up so many times. All right, so another question is how is the new FA24 engine and transmission handling all this crazy power? We've seen people make 350 torque, 400 torque, and we're not even going to really worry about what Mike Body's doing because that is a different application in itself.
Yeah, some of the guys like him are, it's if it's their own car, they're pushing it to the absolute limit. And so far, we haven't that anybody's acknowledging seen a failure yet. The
Hmm.
the challenging part is sometimes when stuff like that does fail finally, they keep that information to themselves. They want
Yeah.
to learn where the breaking point is. They don't necessarily want to share the breaking point. That's fair. So we may not know where that breaking point exists for them, but for what we're seeing and what people are putting up and what numbers we're kind of putting up, haven't seen, knock on wood, haven't seen any issues yet. Haven't even had anybody tell me their clutch is slipping yet, which is very impressive. I thought for sure, like I'm, some of these guys are asking to be closer to 400 torque.
Yeah.
Even like your car is not too far off, and I'm still doing a nice ramp in. Right at the initial peak torque, I kind of try to ease it in and then build up to the closer to 400 torque.
Yeah.
Still not seeing any issues with clutches, but it's still early, and it's not, the thing about a clutch is if you give it a ton of torque, way more than it can handle, yeah, you're going to find a point where it's just going to let it go, especially like on a hard shift or whatever. But if you're exceeding, let's say that the stock clutch is, let's say it's only happy at 350 torque and you're running at 400 torque, it's not going to just immediately start slipping. It's not going to go bad in a week. But every time you are making 400 torque, there is a little bit of slip going on there.
Hmm.
There is a little bit of extra wear going on there. And eventually it could be months, it could be a year. Eventually it's going to stop holding and it's going to start slipping and RPMs will shoot up and it'll be time to upgrade.
Yeah.
But
But
so
I think
far,
most people are okay with that. Like, I think
yeah.
most people are okay with knowing that eventually they're going to upgrade the clutch.
Oh
But
yeah,
how about the
absolutely.
transmission itself? There's been conflicting information. Subaru did come out, and I'm still trying to find this, where they did say, yes, the first few gears are better than what was in the FA20. Now, do you know anything about that?
I don't. I really don't. I haven't found a good definitive piece of information that makes me say, "Oh yes, guys, don't worry. Your
Hmm.
transmission is so much better or 10% better." I have no idea. I really
Exactly.
don't know. I've seen the conflicting information too. I've seen some people tear it down and say it looks just like the original one. I've seen some guys tear it down and say, "Oh, we think it looks better." And I've seen people point out that the Subaru part numbers are different. So,
That's exactly what I've seen, and so far nobody has posted any of these gears anywhere showing any differences. Like, because I've seen the
right.
rods and we've seen the block itself, but like the transmission, because we know it's still a split case, right?
Yep.
It's not like the
That's
STI,
that's the thing. That's the thing. It is it is not the STI transmission.
right?
No matter what, it's still not. You can strengthen some of the gears, you can strengthen some of the components, and that is helpful, absolutely. But the fact that it's a split case, the way it's designed, the way it's built compared to the STI design, which is a completely different ground up design, it's not you're not going to have it's not going to hold 600 torque. It's
Right.
just not. It's
Hmm.
Is it going to hold 500? It might. That'd be pretty cool, but it's not going to get to the point that we've seen with an STI transmission. So that's going to have to be something guys, are aware of as we go down the crazy path.
But I So Mike may not post his, but I promise you, the second somebody's transmission or engine pops, we will find it. It's going to be on Reddit. It's going to be on Facebook. You know, when it
Yep,
comes to, you know how they say about reviews, you only see the bad ones.
I
So
know.
I'm just waiting because there's a lot of guys that are running about 400 torque, 400
Yep,
horsepower, and it's awesome the fact that they're even doing it. But everybody's just waiting to see what happens.
I know. Yeah, I've got my guinea pigs. I've always got a group of guys that are just like, I don't care, give me
Just
all
do
of it.
it.
I don't care if it breaks, and they trust me enough to give them right to the edge of the safe power,
Hmm.
and I trust them not to bash me on the internet when it
When
breaks
it
or if
breaks.
it breaks because we have that. I've been working with these guys for years. They're kind of like my inner circle. Like, hey, like
Uh,
you want to try some stuff? Here it is.
that's awesome.
So I have guys like that out there running around. I have guys like that with the FA20 doing the same thing. I have a guy, no joke, um, has a 2016 FA20, and we're running 23 or 24 pounds of boost on an upgraded turbo with ethanol in it, making somewhere in the vicinity of 440, like just right at the stock direct injection fuel limits. He doesn't have methanol. He doesn't
Huh.
have any supplemental fueling, just literally straight like E50, E60 blend of ethanol. He's been running around like this, drag racing it, beating on it.
Wow.
He's put a clutch in it, and he's done spark plugs and valve cleanings, and he's at 110,000 miles.
Wow.
And he's been at that power level since about 40,000 miles. He drives it a lot, and he beats it every day. It's astonishing. So, I'll say, it's proper tuning, really good maintenance. He takes really good
Hmm.
care of the car. He changes the oil religiously at 2,500 miles with good oil. He does the spark plugs every 20K. He does a valve cleaning every 30 or 35K or something. He takes really good care of the car and he pays attention to it. But, you know, that's pretty wild. So I've got a lot of guys like that with FA20s with good success stories, and I've got my FA24 guys already out there pounding on these things, and so far, so good.
Well, you can add me to that list because
Yeah.
I am definitely going to be
I've
doing a lot of stuff
I've
with it.
seen your videos. I've seen your videos. I know.
You know, because I'm not trying to push the limits, but I do want to push just enough to where I'm fully enjoying the car and taking care of it. And like I said, I've told a lot of people this, and people have been telling me as well. Like there is nobody else on the internet right now that is solely championing this car on YouTube. There's nobody, and I feel like it's almost doing it a disservice because there's so much to say about this new engine and the car
Yeah.
in general. Like it is surprising a lot of people, especially now that tuning came out, because
Hmm.
pardon the pun, a lot of people's tune has changed since they saw what can be done. But at the same
Oh
time, we're
yeah.
getting a lot of new Subaru owners, new WRX owners that may not know this what you're talking about. You know, may not it may have come from Hondas or Toyotas where they're like, oh, I'll change the oil up whenever I get to it.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for Subarus. Which brings me to my next question. When you are tuning these cars, compared to the FA24 or the FA20, is there anything you see besides knock that could be an identifier for you that say, oh, something's really bad might happen if I go past this point? Is there anything like that?
Um. Okay. So an interesting thing on the FA24s is they use an electronic wastegate. Not an electronic boost solenoid like you're thinking of with the FA20s, but
Hmm.
literally an electronic arm that actuates the flapper door open and close on the turbo to maintain the boost pressure. This is pretty common in a lot of German cars. Volkswagen, Audi, some others, they use electronic wastegates like this. So it's not new technology, but it's new for Subaru. Um, and so there's actually you command a wastegate position, not a wastegate duty.
Hmm.
And you see what wastegate position is maintained, um, and you can kind of see the feedback from it. You can sort of see it opening and closing a little bit depending on RPM and boost pressure and things like that. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
So that wastegate position is actually a bit of an interesting indicator of when you're reaching turbo efficiency limits or back pressure limits, or even a little bit on the intake side of things, like when an intake is starting to choke the airflow a little bit. All these things tie into the wastegate position. And if you understand what you're looking at with there's definitely some clues as to when you've reached certain points of efficiency or limits. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
So that's a new and different indicator that I think some tuners are going to understand on this platform, and others are just going to ignore it, push right past it, and not pay attention to those indicators, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and
So,
that's I'm glad that you mentioned that because there's a lot of parts, even if you think in the sense of like saving money in the long run, that's new. The turbo
yep,
inlet is aluminum, and I
yep.
believe that the new one does it come with an electronic boost controller already or no?
Well, that's what I was saying. It's an electronic wastegate.
Wastegate, not a,
It, it
okay. I
it's
see.
literally a motor that moves the wastegate arm in and out. There is no boost controller in the sense of like
Oh, I
changing
see
it
what
to
you
a
mean. I
yeah.
see. I
In other
see.
words, there you won't be putting a Grimspeed boost controller on these
Uh-huh.
cars. It doesn't work. It doesn't use vacuum and boost to actuate the wastegate. It uses an
It's all
electric motor.
electronic. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. I mean that you're saving a lot of money right there. Right? You don't have to
Yeah. Well,
change
and
those parts.
the other thing is it creates a really incredibly consistent boost control. It's really nice actually.
Mhm.
So that's a
That's
it's
good. I'm glad that that's
yep.
something because there are things that people have been asking, or when you're speaking to somebody who does have an FA or FA20 and their experience for the last now we're talking like 6 years, and consumer wise, their thing is like, well, there's really nothing really changed with the engine. Okay, it's just like 3 more horsepower or like
Yep.
400 cc more. That's it. There's nothing, but there is like actual tangible reasons why this is better, and
Oh
um
yeah.
and that's
There's some good technology. Good technology. Electronic bypass valve as well, which is nice. Consistent means that it doesn't necessarily have to open all the time. It can kind of retain some boost between shifts to a degree at light
mhm.
throttle. There's some good technology. Subaru did a good job on this engine, I would say.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into the next question. What are some of the cool major differences like this that you've seen between the 20 and the 24?
So yeah, so the electronic wastegate, that's a big one. Um, Physically inside the engine, as we've seen some teardowns, the rods are significantly stronger. What else? I mean, obviously, the saying goes, there's no replacement for displacement. So an
We're
extra
seeing
point
that.
four
Oh,
liter,
yeah.
that's huge. That's huge. The turbo that they went with is a pretty, I forget what kind of unit it is in
I
there,
think
but
it's a Garrett,
I
right?
think
It
you're right.
is. I
Yeah,
think it's a Garrett.
that sounds right. So they've got a Garrett turbo on there. It's definitely pretty small on the hot side, on the exhaust side. Um, these things are going to be insane with turbo upgrades when
Hmm.
people start getting those done for it, which is going to, it's going to take a little bit longer, I'd say, because they're going to have to incorporate the electronic wastegate. It's going to be something where we're going to see that these hybrid turbos come out is probably what they're going to call them. We'll see, but they're going to have to incorporate that electronic wastegate strategy because you're not going to be able to convert it and run it with a boost control or anything like that and just slap on an existing turbo. So but that's going to be a huge difference because right now that's the biggest thing that chokes the power on the top side of the power band is the really tiny little hot side.
I see.
But good turbo selection, spools up really quick, more displacement, stronger rods, um, electronic wastegate, the fuel pressure, the high pressure fuel pump is I believe now it's a three lobe design, similar to what was in the FA20 BRZ. Um, and what that means is that there's an extra point that it can build pressure, and the pressure actually, instead of running closer to 2200 psi like a FA20, it runs almost 3000 psi like the FA20 in the BRZ. So we have more fuel pressure. I think the direct injectors are about the same flow rate. I haven't seen anybody confirm or say what they are, what they are for capacity. So I don't think we're going to have necessarily a whole lot more fuel limits than we would than we do with the FA20, but we do have some more fuel pressure to work with, so that's nice.
Good. This is, it's, it's crazy to think that how many upgrades have come into this car, and people have talked about now that there is a price hike coming up as well. But even price similarly equipped price for price you're getting so much more car than you originally got for that FA20 price, and I think I don't think that gets enough attention, and I
Yeah,
really feel like when these reviews came out for this car, a lot of big car car journalists did not do a good enough job explaining these changes to people so that because they said pretty much the same thing that everybody's saying now, which is why we have this parrot effect going where they're like, oh, well, it's only 3 more horsepower. It's, slightly slower to 60. It's not better than the old one. Why did they
that's the
make it?
problem. That's the problem. There's two parts to the problem here is journalists only go off of what Subaru tells them. And Subaru didn't do a good job of selling
Oh
what they've
my
done with this car.
goodness.
Subaru doesn't go out there and say, hey guys, we have a potentially a better turbo. We have electronic wastegate now. We've got bigger displacement. And oh, by the way, that 5 extra horsepower, we're doing that with like 9 to 11 pounds of boost, guys.
Exactly.
You know, but that's Subaru. They don't embrace, I don't know, they don't embrace what we do, right? They don't, like GM and Ford and American companies and even like Volkswagen and Audi and some other German companies, to a degree, they build their cars really well. They leave a lot on the table and they let
Mm-hmm.
the aftermarket know, hey guys, you want to party? Go ahead. Subaru doesn't do that. They never have. They're like, here's the car, we'll just leave it alone and enjoy it, okay? You know, so journalists don't get excited about it, and it has to come to the aftermarket. It has to come to guys like you and I to play with it, discover these things, share these things, and then everyone's like, oh wow, wait a minute, you picked up over X amount of horsepower with just a tune? What in the
Mm-hmm.
heck? So
And it's
yeah,
crazy. It feels like this is the first one they've done the same as everybody else without saying it,
yeah,
right? Because there, as we've all seen, there is so much on the table left, and
oh,
I think
absolutely,
with the whole, sorry guys, there's no STI. Here's a WRX with fenders, and it only has 3 more horsepower. All of that happened at the same time. That just it. I think it really blinded people, probably
yeah.
through rage because of the lack of the STI. That they just didn't bother to give the WRX a chance at all.
I think the intent, certainly when they developed this engine, was it was going to be in the STI. It was going to have a bigger turbo and it was going to put out some impressive horsepower that would finally put Subaru, as a contender out of the box with some of the better Volkswagen, Audi, BMW
Oh yeah.
cars that can make mid 300s to the wheels. For example, I have an Audi RS3, puts down 360 at the wheels out of a 2.5 liter 5 cylinder. This FA24 with the right turbo and a couple mod changes and an STI could easily match that power out of the box. No
Wow.
problem. I think Subaru potentially at one point had a goal like that, but then ever changing EPA standards and just it's really hard to build cars for America. And I think that just kind of snuffed out the flame there, and they did what they had to do and they gave us the WRX, you
Yeah.
know.
Which, and
So
I'm happy for it because I still think
yeah.
it has
Oh,
a
and
bright future.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I'm very impressed with it, very happy with it. I'm glad that that still exists at least. You can build that into an STI. We can do STI transmission swaps and
Mm-hmm.
brakes and do all the things to get it to basically build our own STI out of the WRX. It's not like an STI is that far removed from a WRX. It's just a few components. They share a body, they share a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things. But on a personal level, I had said, and I was really excited to buy the FA24 STI when it came out. That was my plan. And so I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get that out of the
Yeah.
box because I wanted to start with that and do all my development on that. But the WRX is, again, still very happy to work with it. Subi Speed already had one, so I didn't need to pick one up. That car's at my disposal. It's very close to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoy working with it. It's fun. And I hope to see. I'm excited for the future for this car, and I hope they keep making at least the WRX.
Yeah. We know we have at least one more year. We know for a
Yeah,
fact we got at least
I
one more
know.
year.
I
So
saw some rumors floating around about 23 being the last year. I really hope that's not the case.
some people at like there's I've seen 2 posts on Facebook where they've gone to their Subaru dealership and their service advisor has told them this is 2023 is the last year. That is the only confirmation we have, which that doesn't
Yeah,
really mean anything. I hope that that's not the case.
I do too. Yeah,
And if it is,
we'll see.
then I mean, what a car to go. I mean, yeah, it's not an STI, but I mean, it's the best WRX we've ever got.
It is.
Hate it or love it on the outside. You
Yeah.
people cannot deny anymore that it is not a better built machine,
Nope.
right? Engineering wise,
Just
it is fantastic.
yeah, a few basic mods and pushing towards 400 horsepower and more torque than you can possibly manage. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I know people say, oh well, yeah, X car has been doing it, Y cars, but Subaru has never been able to do what this Subaru can do, and I think That is
Yeah.
the big important factor here, because like people have been driving WRXs. People love their bug eyes from 2000. They love all these old cars, but they've never been
Hmm.
able to do what this WRX can do today. Um,
That's true.
and I'm with you. I had a 2021 WRX, and my goal was when they said the new one was coming out, I said the same thing. I said I'll enjoy this. When the STI comes out, I'll just get that. And when I saw
Yep.
it, excuse me, when I saw like they had it at the Tokyo show back when they originally announced it, I was like, yep, I'm getting that. Like that's what comes out, I'm getting it. I don't care how much
Hmm.
horsepower it has, I'm buying it. And I
Oh yeah.
was just as sad as everybody else when there was no STI. You
Yeah.
know.
Just disappointing in that factor, but at least we have what we have, and it's very impressive.
Oh yeah,
It's a great car for the money. They're really, and that's the thing is you mentioned people are like, well, company X has been doing this or that. Like I mentioned my RS3,
mhm,
and the RS3 is not a fair comparison to a WRX. The price points are drastically different. So for what you get for performance out of the WRX for its price point, it's hard to beat.
mhm.
If you have a different price point, you have a different budget, and you can afford something different, and you're trying to go out there and be on a high horse and say, oh well, my XYZ car I paid 50 to $60,000 for makes more horsepower at the wheels than the WRX. That's not a valid argument.
Mhm.
We're talking about a car at a certain price point. You have to be fair in your comparisons, and for that price point for this car, it's hard to beat. Fantastic fuel economy is another thing too. I mean, what do you're seeing almost 30 miles to the gallon out of yours
So right
with
now,
with ethanol and tuning.
with ethanol, I'm like right at 27. Like I'm
27.
actually really surprised that it even gives me 20. Because I mean, everybody told
Yeah.
me that you're gonna get less gas mileage, but like I'm getting what the sticker tells me that I'm getting. And I know
And so,
usually the sticker, like a stock WRXs can get a little bit over that, so
yep,
it's still very good.
I actually found some fuel economy with the tuning. I think I told you
Really,
about
you
that, or
did
maybe I
actually,
didn't.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you told Adam, and Adam told me, and I was like,
Yes.
"Are you sure about that?"
Yeah, absolutely. So I was playing around with the Subi Speed car and I was driving it around a bunch and I was looking at some of the way that they did their mapping. And I'm like, man, this is just not optimal. And so I spent some time playing with it and, carefully looking at the data and got to the point where I picked up, I think on pump gas, I was seeing like a 4 mile per gallon increase.
Wow, that's
And then
substantial.
and then when you put those same settings into the ethanol tune, even though the ethanol is using more volume of fuel, um, it translates to seeing basically stock fuel economy even while you're using
Mhm.
E85 and enjoying some boost.
That
That's
is
awesome.
exactly because when I had the JB4 on, I was running E30 and my gas mileage was atrocious. Like
Yeah.
if I went out for a night of racing, I would maybe get 150 miles. Like, and
Yep.
this last time when I went out, I still made it to 290, which
Hmm.
when I went to go fill it up, I was like, this, did I get the
I
right
know.
percentage of ethanol in here? Like it
That's
seems
that's the thing
unusual.
with that's the thing with JB4 is it's very limited in what it can adjust.
Hmm.
You know, it can't adjust all the right things to get the fuel economy to be more optimal. And I thought maybe it was a fluke. Like I didn't initially tell any of my first several customers that I'd sent maps out to that I did anything for fuel economy. I had them contacting me and saying, wait, my fuel economy seems like it's way too high. And I'm like, perfect. I like to hear it from you. I don't want confirmational bias. I don't want to tell
Right.
somebody you should see more fuel economy. And they're like, oh, I should see more fuel economy. And they're like, I see more fuel economy.
Yeah,
I want to
exactly.
hear I
Let
want to
them
hear it
say
from
it.
them without telling them I did it. And then I know
Yeah.
it's working.
Yeah,
It's not just me.
26.9, and I'm surprised every time I fill up, I'm get over 300 miles. Oh,
Yeah.
easily 330, 350 out of my tank. And I still do some pulls from time to time, but
That's amazing out of a 2.4 liter engine, right?
mhm.
Um, comparing to like a brand new, the newest STI, if I do an E85 tune for one of those, you're lucky to crack 200 miles
Yeah.
on a tank. You're filling up all the time because those
Yeah.
EJ engines are so inefficient. And I have guys all the time contact me after tuning and they're like, oh, I'm not getting good fuel economy. I'm like, sorry, it's the EJ engine. Like I've literally spent so many hours on those trying to get what I can get out of them. And
Hmm.
it's just the technology is just not good. You know, the FA, the direct injection, all that stuff works so much better.
Yeah, I feel for them. I mean, I'm glad they're only paying like 270 a gallon on ethanol, but it sucks
Yeah, at
because you're
least
not
the yeah
getting you're
around
not getting
here.
far.
I know.
That's pretty bad. That's one thing that was another reason when I was originally looking at the STI and the WRX, even if I had the option to buy one, gas mileage was a big deal because I drive about 60, 70 miles a day.
Oh
And
yeah,
I
that's huge for
can,
you then.
even though I'm still only getting like 300, 350, like I'd rather get that than like 210 because I had an RX-8. My very first car I bought
Oh,
for myself as an adult without looking at anything was an RX-8. I saw it in X-Men when I was in high school
yep.
because I thought it was the coolest thing. I got out of college, I went and bought one, and I had
Mm.
no idea that it was just that garbage of gas mileage. Like it basically got
Oh
the same
yeah.
gas mileage as like a V8 Durango. Like it was atrocious.
Oh
And
man,
I
yeah.
was in Houston, and I drove for
Rotaries.
work.
Yeah, the rotary engine's very inefficient.
Yes,
They
a lot of
sound
fun.
cool. They
Yeah.
sound cool. They're interesting. They've got some cool benefits, but you can't spin a rod bearing. But fuel economy is not a good point on those.
Yes. I mean, I was pouring fuel and oil at the same time, all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Thankfully, I had the extended warranty on it, and I did lose compression, and they actually replaced the engine for me at like 60,000 miles, which basically gave me a brand new car.
Yep.
But so I know what it's like to have a car with bad gas mileage. Okay, so this there's a couple of more questions. I'm kind of a little running out of time, but I want to jump to the dam one. This was really interesting because I asked Adam about this.
Yep.
Is the dam changes when I had the OTS, the Cobb OTS on there, and even when I was looking at the stock simulated map, what was really interesting was when the car was just cruising, the dam would just drop, 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 just
Hmm.
so low. And it was scary because we're not accustomed to seeing that. But then as soon as I would get on the car, the dam would just quickly go right back up to one. So we thought that maybe it's just doing it for whatever power that it's looking for, and if it doesn't need it, it just drops when it comes back. So like, what's happening with that?
Okay. So DAM stands for Dynamic Advanced Multiplier. Okay. Its purpose, it operates a little bit like an octane ratio multiplier. This concept exists to some degree in almost every type of ECU, whether it's German, American, whatever. They call it different things, but basically its purpose is to be able to optimize ignition mapping for high octane fuel, but also have it be able to move itself down as needed for lower octane fuels. So that what the dam does is if the number's at one, it takes a portion of the timing table and it multiplies it by that number and adds it to the base table. So if the multiplier is one, you have the maximum timing that's possible in the tune.
Mm-hmm.
If the dam is zero, and let's say that you're at a particular load in RPM that there's 4 degrees of timing in the advanced table that gets added to the base. If the dam is zero, you're getting zero of that 4 degrees. So
Mm-hmm.
you'd be 4 degrees less timing in that spot.
Right.
If the dam is zero point 0.5, you would get 2 degrees because it multiplies it by
Interesting.
4
Okay.
times 0.5. So that's how that number works. It multiplies whatever's in your advanced ignition timing table and then adds it to the base. And so that way the dam can move and that whole table can be cut in half or 80% if it's 0.8 and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's a dynamic way of adjusting your timing everywhere based on seeing knock. If the ECU determines that it's seeing too much knock, it will move the dam. If it's seeing a little bit of knock, it'll use the feedback knock. If it sees a little bit of knock and it keeps seeing it in a certain window of time in the same spot, it'll use the fine learn just to remove some timing in that particular area. If that's still not enough or the frequency of the knock is high enough, then it switches right over to the dam multiplier adjustments and brings those down.
Mm-hmm.
What we've seen on the FA24, and it's pretty common on the FA20 as well, is that it's pretty easy to jump to the dam movement right away. Sometimes before you see feedback knock at all. The engines are noisy in these cars. The knock sensitivity is dialed in pretty high, and they're very sensitive to octane of fuel. They
Yeah.
do get some real knock, especially even cruising around. There's some weird mapping in the stock FA24 map that, from what I can tell in my testing, really does create some knock in those areas. So that's why the dam moves around a lot.
Okay, because it was concerning. Because even when I had the stock simulated, and I was telling Adam this, I was like, dude, that thing was really low for no reason. And even when we were doing the test, when the first pulley did just on the stock simulated, he was like, I don't understand why this dam is just sitting at 6.625. He
Yeah.
reset the ECU, reflash it, and it was still there. Unlike like in the previous batch, it would actually go back to one.
So let me tell you one thing that's helpful. So there's a setting in the tune where you can decide after a reset, where does the dam start? From the factory, the dam starts at 0.625, I think it is, or whatever you notice. So that's why a
Okay.
reset doesn't put it back to 1. Typically, tuners, and I do this too, is we put the dam at 1 on a reflash. We want to start at
Hmm.
1 and work down if we need to. So we start at 1, we tune it while it stays at 1, and we set optimal boost fuel and timing with your dam being at 1.
Hmm.
Under normal conditions, if everything is happy and you've got good fuel in the car, your dam should never move. If you go fill up with some crappy fuel, or you're beating on the car and you're getting the cylinder temps too high, higher than we, have can manage in the tune, then the dam can move down. That's how we want to tune it.
I
That's, at least
see.
that's how I do it. Subaru's idea is to start the dam somewhere just above the middle, and as long as the octane's good enough, it'll work up to 1. If the octane's not good, it'll stay in the 0.6, 0.7 range, and if the octane's bad, it'll move down farther.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That does. Yeah.
So that's Subaru's strategy versus um, most tuned map strategies. Even OTS works that way. OTS
Hmm.
starts it off at 1 and lets it move down. So
Interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
because that's one thing that we noticed even just stock, and Adam, like I said, he's still learning, and he asked me, he's like, has your dam always been like this? I'm like, dude, it's like a roller coaster. I drive here, it
yep,
was just up and down. Like I don't know what to tell you, and I
yeah,
haven't even done anything to it. So
yep.
that was interesting. Last question. And it's not fair to even ask you this, and it's something that we're all going to see, and it's the question about long-term reliability. You know, I don't expect you to give everybody like, hey, this is how long your engine's going to last. But
Yep.
basically, even from this last question about the dam is, you guys are setting it into a way to where you should be able to see if there's something wrong right away and get with your tuner. So what do you
Yep.
think compared to the FA20s? Give us what is your best opinion on this subject?
Okay. I've got good news for you from my perspective. Um, we'll say a little caveat about the whole RTV thing, because I'm sure guys are going to ask about the whole
Mm-hmm.
RTV and the pickup. That's definitely very frustrating and unfortunate to see. It just looks like sloppy craftsmanship, and perhaps Subaru Subaru with the FB engines, I believe it was, they were notorious for oil leaks. And so they just started ramping up the RTV use and just letting it go into the oil, and the strainer's there to pick it up, right?
Uh-huh.
They've redesigned the strainer. And if you've probably seen the pictures where the
Yeah.
strainer is like a cage, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of surface area beyond what you can see on the initial bottom. Most of the RTV sticks to the bottom and oil can come in around the sides. Is it ideal to have that much RTV sitting in there? No. If you get a car with a lot of RTV and it starts coming up around the sides and really restricting the oil supply to the engine, that could be an issue. So, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that the RTV thing is, even if you don't address it, it's never going to impact your oiling and you're not going to have to worry about rod or bearing relating issues. I think the reliability of the FA24 is going to be even better than the FA20, and I think the FA20 is actually better than the EJ.
Mm-hmm.
The FA20 pistons are a lot stronger. Um, I just I've tuned thousands of EJs and thousands of FA20s now, right? And by far, I see more EJ failures of broken ringlands and spun rod bearings and stupid things, even with decent maintenance, than I do with the FA20s. I've got far more guys pushing power and having good reliability out of the FA20 than I do with the EJ. The EJ is not a good engine. And
Really?
it's in factory form, it's not a good engine,
Uh-huh.
and the factory tuning runs it lean. The factory tuning does a lot of things to harm the engine. If you bought a new STI, I don't care if it's an RA block or not. If you bought a new STI and you're like, I'm going to go a couple years without modding it or tuning it, but you like to beat on it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not good for the engine. And then by the time you put some mods on it, you start trying to tune it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've already been showing it a lot of detonation. You still might break the ring lands even in those magic RA pistons. Even
Wow.
if you don't break the ring lands, detonation pushes down on the rod and slams the bearing into the crank and starts to beat up the rod bearings. You'll have oil, rod bearing issues eventually. There's a lot of things about those engines that make them unreliable. However, the FA20, again, with some good maintenance, I don't see nearly as many. I mean, you don't ever really see broken ring lands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you have a lean out condition, you have some weird stuff, you can melt pistons. If something goes wrong and there's um, the rods get bent and break. We've seen that. But if the tuning is done correctly on those and you maintain it, you keep an eye on it, you do the regular maintenance on it, they've been very reliable. And now what we're seeing with the FA24 is that they seem to be built even better than the FA20. So I think the reliability on the FA24, barring any RTV related potential issues, I think it's
Right.
going to be great. I think they're going to be
That's
very reliable.
Well, you have pretty much just given us the probably the first of many controversial issues that are going to go down in my comment section is the FA20 is better than the EJ, which I think a lot of people already know this by now, but it's a lot of Subi bros, like we like to call them, really
Yep.
don't like to hear
Well, yeah.
this.
So other than the rods being a weak point, now you can make more power on an EJ. That's a fact. And as a platform to build from, if you do an IAG built EJ25, you can send that power to the moon easily.
Hmm.
There's a lot of limitations with the FA20 with the direct injection. You have to add port injection, which means difficult control, which means expensive Motecs or piggyback systems that might be unreliable.
Hmm.
It's hard to take an FA20 to, let's just say, 800 horsepower. That's very difficult to do. It can be done, it's been done, but it is much easier to do it with the EJ because you're dealing with port injection, you're dealing with older, simple technologies. Direct injection is amazing for um, drivability, for fuel economy, for to get to that first 400 horsepower, if you will. It's
Right.
easier to take a direct injection engine and take it to a high level is much more difficult. But if we're just talking about guys that want to buy their car, they want to drive it for 100,000 miles, they want to do a few mods to it, they want it to last, the FA is a better engine than the EJ. I'll argue that all day long, even though I love my EJs and I've
Uh-huh.
got 3 in my garage that I build and race. It's just it's a fact. It's the data shows it to me.
Yeah, and the data also shows that the average age of a WRX owner is 36 years old, and usually with either one animal or one child. And most
Yeah.
of these guys are not, yeah, they want exactly what you're talking about. They want that first extra 100 horsepower. They play
Yep.
with it on the weekends, and during the week, it's just a family car. And I think
Hmm.
that is a great way to end this and sum all this up is for $30,000, you get something that's a lot of fun, super reliable, great for
Hmm.
all seasons, and just and if you want to build it, there's something there for you to build. And
Absolutely.
I've loved Subarus since I was a kid. Since the very first one I saw in WRC, World Rally Championship when I was a kid. We never had cable. I finally got cable. I got speed vision. I was like, what are these cars going like 100 miles per hour through the dirt? And I used to watch Sebastian Loeb roll his I think he was in the bug eye at the time, and I was like, it's just some random four-door car that they threw on here and it's beating everybody. How is this even possible?
Yep.
And I knew one day I was gonna get one, and I'm glad I did, and I'm glad that so much interesting things are happening with it while I'm still alive. I'm glad I'm not missing this.
Yep.
Um, that's really all I have for you, Graham. I really
Cool.
appreciate you taking the time to answer some of these questions. We'll see what the comment section say. We'll see what people ask. If you are willing, we'll definitely have you back for a second
Sure.
episode of Tuner Talk. Um, any last remarks for us before we go?
No, not really. No, appreciate you having me on. It's always fun to talk and chat. So if people have questions, maybe collect some of the common questions and we can do a recap or like a follow-up video and answer some of those specific questions guys have. Always happy to do that.
I definitely will do. In the meanwhile, if you guys, I know you guys do e-tuning as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's I'm I've actually tried to stop traveling so much for tuning.
Mm-hmm.
I go to Chicago monthly. Most of the tuning with St. Louis is all remote. Adam runs the cars in the dyno, I tune them. I do a lot of remote dyno tunes for different shops at this
Mm-hmm.
point. It's just gotten to be honestly more convenient and easy. People don't have to wait for me to show up.
Yep.
So, but e-tuning is a big part of what we do. I literally just sent out, I think three or four FA24 tunes yesterday that came in. We've been very busy with those cars. It's been awesome. They're
That's
really fun to
that's
work
really
with.
good.
So,
I'm
but
glad.
yes, we absolutely do e-tuning, and it's one of the things we focus on quite a bit.
Okay, because people did when I posted my protein video, we did have a couple of people from the comment section actually reach out to Ecotech to get I don't know if to get on your schedule, get on their schedule, which is great. And I'm
Yep.
hoping if anybody else is watching now and you are looking for somewhere to tune, I'll have the links for the websites down below,
Yeah.
and you guys can just reach out to them.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Graham, again,
Contact us.
yep, thank you so much for this.
Very
And
welcome.
everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was a lot of information, and I'm glad because that's what I wanted this to be is for you to actually learn something. Anyway, that's it for us. Thank you so much, Graham. And this is my child here. Ask me 1 second, baby. I know.
She was this close. She was this close.
She's this close. She did a really good job because we actually have to go take her to some
Yeah.
jumping place where she's gonna go jump. Anyway,
Okay.
I will
Have
see you
fun with
guys
it.
in the next one. Graham, I will see you as well.
Take care.
Thanks.